Hello, everyone. Welcome back. It has been once again a chaotic day, and all kinds of fun is happening. So, gonna dive in. I've got a lot of issues and pull requests that have been outstanding that I unfortunately let sit for way too long. So, going to get some stuff cleaned up and get things going. So, up first on the docket. So I have a .NET template, and unfortunately, I have a .NET template that has not been revved to the Material Design 5. And I got a bug report here. It's the standard default one that has come in quite a bit. It's the one that I suspected would break people the most of, hey, the Material Design defaults has been renamed. You need to do either Material Design 2 defaults or Material Design 3 defaults. Pick your favorite. But that doesn't help you if the template is wrong. So we're going to start there and get that one updated first, because this one should be an easy thing to fix. So the way these templates work is inside of each of these repositories is effectively a full-blown solution for the template. Now I think I'm gonna have to remember how many conditional things I left in here. Typically, you can just fire up Visual Studio with this guy and have it just work. Um, but okay. So I think what I want to do here, first of all, and it may end up failing because these templated things have extra conditions in the files. Kind of weird things happen every so often. But I want to look at what's referenced. So this got bumped to Material Design 5.0, which is great. My Dependabot is wonderful, but yeah, this is a problem. So now the question is, what should my template use? I'm somewhat tempted to go with the Material Design 3 one. I don't think it'll make a difference for any of mine, but we're gonna bump that there, and then we're gonna just quickly test this because I think that's the only change that's actually relevant um for this, because there was the brush rename and then the styles rename. Let's see. Yeah, and I think those are all fine. This one is not fine. This is going to be Material Design, because accent was renamed to secondary checkbox. That should fix that. But let's change our startup project here, and then let's just fire this guy up and see what happens. I think it'll just work. There we go. Ooh, XAML Live preview. Interesting. Yeah. I like that Microsoft is trying to add in these tools. Like, this is generally what I would end up using Snoop for, to be able to see this kind of information. I wish this was more complete, right? Like, it's so great that I can get this kind of information, but this is not enough. So goodbye live preview. Okay, so that launches their count. It's interesting that I don't remember why I put in a I don't know why I put in a style for the secondary checkbox, and then I was in trying to show off implicit styles, but I'm kind of thinking that there's no checkbox in here. Let's just get rid of it. Not really adding value, and it's just something that's going to confuse people when they add a checkbox later on and they go, why is it different? Like, it's good to know about implicit styles, but I don't know if there's much more. Okay, so I think that's probably good. We're going to go here. Oh, one other thing I want to do. File, open with VS Code. Close this guy up. Studio Code in here. Save. Okay, so there is a test local that'll go through. It'll build up the templates and test all of these things through, which is great. It's not quite what we want to be doing yet. I think I'm just gonna push it. But what I do need to do is rev the package version. I think this is probably I feel like this is a minor version rev. Is there anything else I needed to change in here before we do this? I don't know if there was. A handful of things where I might consider like some Dependabot stuff, but I think most of these were working the way I expected. So we are going to just bump the version, and that is going to full send it. So we can do a branch because I actually do have CI on this. Fix DIX 50. See, so app.xaml gets updated. Great. Bump CS proj. Great. Fixing build for MDIX 5.0. Commit push. Cancel the like this. Push and start pull request. Boom. Boom. And then for anybody who's using Azure DevOps, the latest Git Kraken has some new support for setting your reviewers and assignees on 13.9. That was one of the was it guys down here was one of the cool new features for being able to actually set that information up, which is nice. I like it. Man line. May circle back to that here in a bit. See. We will see. Okay, so let's go here. Let's go here. Pull requests. And then I'm going to change this here to reference the issue so it auto closes. Fix 143. Fixes pound 143. For GitHub, if you put comments like this here onto a PR, what you will see happen on the issue itself, you'll see that the GitHub now knows that this issue is linked to that pull request. So once this pull request completes, it will automatically close the issue as well. So slap that in, call it a day. And then this thing will go through, verify the builds, verify that all of my templates still work. It does very basic tests on them. Basically, does the template execute? Does the project that it builds run? And where applicable, do the tests run for it? So that'll make that go away. That'll get a new version of the template out, and we're off to the race. Okay, so we're going to close that, close that, close that. Okay. So we've got a couple PRs. Nikolai has once again been busy. This is adding in a new readme.markdown file, which is the recommended approach for new spec files. Honestly, at some point I want to get away from these new specs altogether. Let's see, docs readme.md. We have a docs readme.md? I'm confused. Oh, no, it's targeting docs. Okay, okay. Got it, got it, got it, got it. So it's just putting it there, and it's just bringing it in. And for now, it's just using the basic repo readme. Great. It's kind of one of those features that is nice. NuGet spammed a bunch of people when they turned thing on, or not when they turned it on, a few months ago when they were trying to have a big push for everybody to go use it, and it was really annoying. Okay, let's go here. Okay, fixes this guy here. So add access to smart hint of text box, password box, placeholder text to set horizontal alignment. All right, so this is being able to go mid, right, center. Great. Let's see, rest left, float inherit, rest center, float inherit. Got it. Okay, cool. Okay, let's take a look. Let's take a look. So this is demo app here. What we see, this is just setting up a standard bindable property. Great, looks fine. This is the actual demo app itself. Not going to look at this. We're going to look at it when we run it here in a second. Okay, what is going on here? Feels like I have white space enabled. Hide white space. Don't care. Okay, so wow, so this is fun. Let's see. So if the length is an 8, any not null, This whole thing here is this additional value here went from what used to be a double, parsing all the way through as a horizontal alignment. Comes down here, allows for floating hint horizontal alignment. Okay. Sense. The float alignment, float alignment. Just switching to the new ones. And then new dependency properties underneath hint assist, which makes sense. Hint horizontal alignment. Inherit. So the default is inherit. No, just I'll call this out for. Oh. No. I rebooted my computer and I don't have Zoom It running. Bad Zoom It. So this inherit, right, and this inherit are very different, right? This first one is the default value for the framework property metadata. The second one is the property metadata options. And you'll note this framework property metadata, most of your dependency property templates aren't going to put this in. They're just going to put in property metadata. Framework property metadata is a derived class that gives you access to this options, specifically to do things like inherits, binds two-way by default, that kind of thing. Hey, Benjamin. It may end up just being material design. We're going to see. I was waiting on getting some feedback. I never got it. So, yeah, for the other project. Okay. And then this just sets a binding using the new attached property. Code review looks fine. Let's check here. And then refresh. Thank you. Let's see. Check out. And then let's go. Come on. Okay. Boom. Okay, so we're just going to fire up the demo and take a look at it. Fire this guy up. Hey, Benjamin, you don't happen to have a small sample of that question you were messaging me about earlier by any chance, do you? What about the DB context and AutoMocker? Say that might be an interesting thing to talk through, but obviously I need it in a different project. Throwing that out there. Okay, sorry, complete side conversation there. Okay, so let's dive here because I think this was the. Just confirm here. Yeah, it was in the smart hint of where it was, and I believe the screenshots shown were right along there. Okay. So, let's see. Float. Yeah, if you want to, I'd happily talk through it because I feel like that's a useful example for people to see. Okay, so these ones here. So float hint inherit. So if I do this, I expect left on all of these. Yeah. Okay, if I do center, center it up, center it up, center it up, center it up. Yeah, the outline one is always the hardest. And then right. Preferably compiles. At a minimum, I kind of want to just show the setup for a test like that because I think that's a useful thing to talk through. So I think smaller that compiles is probably better. Ooh. Sorry, I'm just noticing something. Oh, no, I think that's sorry, I was thinking the icons weren't aligned, but I think that's probably just difference of because the icons in material design, we'll put them in the same box, but the actual path data for the icons aren't always perfectly in the same spot, I've noticed. Some of them are kind of weighted a little differently or offset a little bit. That should be the same because stretch is basically horizontal across, but that means the text starts all the way onto that side. Ooh, sorry, 1 second. I need to pull real quick. Uh, wow. Okay. That's shocking. Right before the stream started, I submitted a support ticket to Microsoft. That was about 19 minutes ago. And I just got an email saying, good news, we've resolved the issue. Dang. That was fast. 19 minutes? Okay. If it really is fixed, color me very, very impressed, Microsoft. That is insanely fast. Um, yes, that customer support person did an amazing job. Thank you, Jessica. Okay. Yeah. No. Yeah. I kind of want to. It'll take me a little longer than just a few seconds to check it, so I'll do it after the stream. But wow. Um, this looks wonderful to me. Good news. I got another email saying our templates PR has been merged and a new NuGet is live. So yeah, that's cool. So that's now done. This looks great to me. We're gonna put this into 5.1, and I feel like this is something that is an enhancement that is worthy of release notes. So just for people who are aware, if you see the release notes label, my release pipeline will use that to generate my release notes for me so that I don't have to. I am that lazy. Okay, so let's do that. I am that lazy. Okay, so this one here, this is all the positional stuff. Because this is a big refactor that Nikolai has been going through in an effort to make the smart hint a lot better. And I will say he has done an amazing job. As you can see, just this is the view model for the demo app changes. Like that's just to demo all the features. That is impressive. Okay. Trying to remember where we left this one though. Trying to remember where we left this one. Think I might have to go uh uh oh. Oh, the pattern matching problem. Oh. 462. Okay. Uh .NET framework port end dates. So I try to say that I will support a framework as long as Microsoft does. But once it drops out of Microsoft support, I make no guarantees that I'm going to support it. 462 is technically supported for 3 more years. Dang. Man. Yeah, I'm hesitant to kill it. That's disappointing that I recall having some issues with this syntax due to the net framework. Oh, look at that. Oh, interesting. Okay, I want to go look at this. I totally believe Nikolai's right. But I want to see if there's a workaround. I didn't realize list pattern matching required language support. Look. Let's look. Pattern matching. What I want is list pattern matching. Ooh, a fun brain teaser I can share with some people here in a second. Let's see. Ba-ba-ba. Oh, I bet you. Oh, I bet you it's not actually list that requires it's probably not list pattern matching. I bet you it uses range and index. Oh, I bet you that's how it does it. Derp. I where'd it go? Yeah, I bet you this. I bet you under the hood, list pattern matching uses range and index to do the matches, and I bet you this has a limit. Bet you that's what it. Sorry, with notifications. What's going that up? Yep. But I'm willing to bet. Okay, we're gonna try it. We're gonna try it because I wonder if I can shim this in because I can't help it. I cannot help it. We gotta try this because this might be an interesting. Which file was this I had commented on? Floating hint margin converter. Go here. Floating hint margin converter. Okay. Okay. So the proposal here was rather than doing all of this, one of the cool new things you can get away with following syntax. And this syntax, when I first saw it, I was convinced it was pretty well worthless. Because you'll note, checking the values for null, checking the length, pulling all the items out into their given type is kind of annoying. Right? So, but there is the concept of we have to invert this because there's the positive versus negative. Right? So there's that. Okay, so what is going on here? Aside from the fact that I can't do that. So, yeah, that's it. So you'll see I'm on net 462 here. If I toggle this up, right, problem goes away. Because this now works, which is great. That's what we want. But if we set ourselves back to 462, and for reference, I feel like people oftentimes miss the drop down. So top left drop down, if you've got a project that has multiple target frameworks and you want to look at one of them, change the drop down and you can see the difference. Also useful if you've got like a bunch of pound ifs for hey, is net framework 2.0 or whatever. Like that's the type of thing that it is perfect for. Let's see here. Stop pestering me. I think we can shim this in. I think this is I think you can shim in index and range if I remember right. C sharp net framework index. I think no, that might be this doing it. No. What is the way to do this? Yeah, this. Yeah, this guy here. So there's a bunch of shims, but I think let's see. It's probably under collection. This is not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for index. Go to file. Index. Up there. Okay. Okay. I want to see the declaration. I think you can get away with this sheet. Because there's a handful of features inside of C sharp that use what's called duck typing. And it's very explicit that they don't have the compiler be real picky about where the type is defined because that means that you can never do this backporting type situation. If I go here, right? system index, right? And there's the key, right? So this is the reason it's failing. Available in net 6, net 7, not available in net 462. I want to look at you. I think what I can get with is doing something funky. I think I can do something completely crazy, like copy this. Decide if there's anything fancy in here that I need to worry about. Back and find. It should. If I do in that guy, I would like to do here. Frankly, I'd like the whole bloody. Gimme. I think I want this. I think I want this. I think what I want to try. Following. I want to go found if net 462 and if then I want to do paste. And actually I should probably pull this out into it. I don't know if this is going to work, but it might. It might. We're going to try it. We're going to try it and just wrong namespace, all that stuff. Not where we're going to actually put it. Something in the back of my mind is telling me that this was a feature that was shimmable. Again, I could be just making this up and it could be coming from nowhere. Okay. Let's see. Got that. Don't need, we aren't going to do private core lib garbage. Going to do that. Do that. We can do file scope the namespace. Okay. Is there anything else in here? Not know when. That isn't going to be a thing. We can do that, and I don't care. We don't care about that. If not net standard and not net framework, but we are going to be net framework. We don't care. Okay, we have that. Compile 462. I'm so proud of myself right now. Oh, I'm so proud of myself right now. Okay. Now, there's going to quickly become a question of should we do this? But I think I'm demonstrating the can we do this is clearly yes. Because that's kind of fun. So lesson learned, if you want to use list pattern matching in older net framework, it looks like it's shimmable. Take that. Follow that in place. Like we could clean up a little bit of this, but why bother? Because in 2027, I delete this file. There's that. Okay, so let's actually move this somewhere useful and then see if we can internal add folder paste. Adjust namespaces, no. Let's see. How do you determine when you can and can't shim something? If it's easy code, you can essentially bring it into the right namespace. Yeah, so I don't know if there's an easy way to know when you can or can't. So the important things here are when new versions of C# and .NET come out, there's a difference between compiler features and runtime features. Compiler features are much easier than runtime features because the runtime you have to make sure actually like exists on the user system. Now, oftentimes we hope that, users have the latest runtime and all that stuff, but if you're targeting net framework 462, like you could be targeting a fairly old operating system that's running that. Like we could be back on a Windows 7 machine. Oh dear heavens, right? Like heaven forbid somebody say the words XP. But that's for those older. Actually, I don't know if you can run 462 on XP. I'd have to anyway. Regardless, it could be ye old machine. If a feature doesn't require runtime support, which it is somewhat rare that you need runtime support, because the types of things that require runtime support are things that require the IL to either be interpreted differently, or have or expose a new opcode or that kind of thing. Because remember the steps and how it goes. So with C#, when we compile, and I'm going to ignore things like AOT and that kind of stuff. We're going to do ye simple mode, right? When you compile, your C# code goes to intermediate language, commonly called either CIL for Common Intermediate Language, or MSIL is the old name for Microsoft Intermediate Language. They dropped the MS and went for a C. That IL is not completely unreadable, right? So if we do something like sharplab.io, right? If we look at the IL, come on, load, right? IL looks like this. And even without a lot of knowledge, we can kind of read our way through some of this stuff, right? IL has classes, public, auto, ANSI, before field, init. There's some weird stuff in here, but we can see C extends system object from the system runtime library. Like, even without a lot of IL knowledge, with just a little C#, you can kind of start to reason through it. You then starting to get into these opcodes, and they're kind of a little difficult to read, but like if anybody has done work with any assembly language, IL is designed to be similar, but the whole point of having it be this intermediate language is your code compiles to this, and then the runtime is responsible for converting this into either like x86, x64, ARM, whatever, right? That's part of how we got to all this cross-plat stuff is, well, hang on, as long as we have a runtime that can take that can interpret IL, and IL is a finite set of instructions, well defined. There's not a lot there. And then convert it to the native bytecode, we can run on anything, right? We just need a runtime, right? Like as though a runtime's simple. It's complicated. There's garbage collection, all that kind of stuff, but it's somewhat simple. So a lot of times compiler features require classes that are shipped in the BCL. So in this case, like system.index. So in order for whatever this, and we can actually look and see. So public int, or I guess I don't need to int foo gets, I don't know, 1 2 3, right? We'll do that, and we'll go no muscle memory. So if foo is, int I, int j, int x, right? Then do the needful, right? So we can see this is the pattern matching. So it compares the collection foo and says, okay, if the length is 3 and the first item is an int and the second item is int and the third item is an int, create these locals, and then we'll call the if. We go and look at the IL, we can probably get a pretty good hint as far as what the thing is going on here. And you'll note the Sharp Labs is really cool in that it'll highlight which, as you click on the IL instructions, which ones correspond to which sections of code. You'll note we've got a small itty bitty little problem in that it didn't actually highlight the things over here. Let's see. So what do we have? So we create it, we store the field in the local, and then we pop the local back on top of the stack. Great. Branch on false is the start of our if condition, and you'll see this is an IL line number, right? So it would jump down to here. This is not actually showing. I expected to see something related to system.index. But that may just be the compiler needing it. Because this is the hard part is you don't always know. Let's look at the lowered code. That might yield more interesting things. So if the array is not equal to null and the array.length is 3, assign num all the way through. Right? That's the sum total of what that thing is setting up. And you can see here there's a weird thing where it's showing an opcode is not supported. So this may be a weird version of .NET am I on? The latest. Tell me opcode not supported. That seems weird. And this could be a Sharp Labs thing. But again, going back to the original question is when can you tell if it's shimmed? If the only thing that is needing these types is the compiler, oftentimes the way the compiler is written is to say, hey, I'm going to look for this fully qualified name. So namespace plus type name. And if I find it, I'm not going to be real picky about what assembly that comes from. And that's actually a really nice feature because it allows that that type to be shipped later or added or shimmed into an older BCL. Because otherwise, if they didn't allow that, there would be no way to add indexing support to an older one. Now, the base class library, so your system namespace for net 6 and net 7 obviously come with system.index and system.range and all of those things defined, and that's wonderful. But for older ones, that's obviously not there. But if you define it and you're using the newer compiler, right? So this is a situation where oftentimes people don't always separate out their target framework from their Lang version, right? And I believe if we go up here, my props file, I'm real intentional about setting Lang version to latest because I want to be using the latest compiler. And this is important because you have to be using a compiler that supports the new feature. And if you have a compiler that's supporting the new feature, just because the BCL doesn't have the needed type doesn't mean you couldn't provide it. So most features that come in C# are compiler only features because they're so much easier. So much easier. And some of them may be shimmable, but not trivially. Like it could be like there's a bunch of work here. But most of the time, those are not common because a lot of like the features that we've gotten in C# over the years, right? So if we go here, what's new in C#? Right? So if we pick on C# 12, for example, right? The new features in C# itself, primary constructors, collection expressions, which is what I was just abusing, ref read only, default lambda parameters, alias any type, inline arrays, experimental interceptors, right? All of those features, some of these are different syntax, right? Like primary constructors. You can use these targeting older frameworks because at the end of the day, as long as you're using the newer compiler that understands how to parse that C# code and generate the IL, it can generate IL that is usable by the net framework 462 runtime. Right? That's the kicker, is that the compiler can target a different framework and produce a different assembly, which is why you'll see the assemblies are a little bit different on each of the target frameworks. They aren't exactly the same because if they were, then there would be no difference between frameworks. But that also allows us to then have some fun with this stuff. Okay. Okay, so enough with that. I am going to, it's just syntactic sugar. Yes, correct. And a significant number of C# features are just syntactic sugar. And again, it depends on how you want to define syntactic sugar. Because at the end of the day, as long as we can get down to IL, right, that's pure compiler magic. But that's part of what like the C# team spends all of their time arguing over is, okay, what C# structures is the compiler going to parse into what? And how can we add things to that set without breaking other things? Right? That's where it gets That's where all the debates come. Like everything's possible for C# to implement. It's just not all of it's beneficial or trivial. And so oftentimes the questions come, well, why haven't you implemented, insert my favorite feature here? And the answer is we just haven't had time. There's only so much time, and the quality bar that has to be met for a feature in C# is pretty high. Pretty high. Pretty high. Okay. So I'm going to do this. And then I'm going to just check this into Nikolai's branch. Then I'll shoot him a message and go, got it. Because I'm somewhat tempted if I should check it into his branch or if I should go put it on main. I might just go put it on main. Might be better. Might be better. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to throw this away. Throw this away. And then what we're going to do is we're going to stash or switch. And we're going to go, oh, I'm going to need to change something. Let's see. Gem list patterns. Boom. Right? Pop. And then we're going to come over here. There's one thing I want to be real careful about. Good. I declared it internal. I didn't want this to become public. That's when I say I miss not having the parameter null checking. Okay, so this is good here, and then I think I want to. I don't know how to put in a test. Let's look. We can probably find one of these converters because there's plenty, like list pattern matching. I am convinced. Yeah, this guy here. This guy here is a perfect one, right? This is what list pattern matching was made for. So this is literally saying, hey, I'm looking for a set of values that has a length of 2, and I need them both to be doubles. We go if values is collection, and the first value is double, and we're going to pattern match into a local called width, and if the second value is one called height, which one of these would you rather read, right? And conveniently, because this is a pattern match, it also won't match on null. So it's a null check, a length check, and then a type check on each value. Which, again, it's one of those. When I first saw it, I was like, "Oh, that's weird. When is somebody going to leverage this? Oh, and we did this wrong. This really should be nullable. This is probably an artifact of some of the nullability stuff. Yep, that should be nullable. That should be nullable. That should be nullable. That should be nullable. Okay. So this will at least prove that it works. Right? So we're going to do this. And then we should probably run this just to prove it, right? It compiles, so I'm fairly confident we're fine, but we should run it. And then we'll make sure this guy works all the way. Okay, so run the demo app. Okay, so this is underneath, let's see, border clip. I think that'll show up in button. Yep. Oh, passes through. We'll make sure we hit this inside at least once because I'm sure there's a usage for the border clips. Maybe not. I'd have to probably track down where it's used, but short version, good there. Okay, so create branch. I already made the branch. There we go. Okay, so converter, move this out of the way so my big head isn't in the way. Collapse stage files, index stage, shim for index allows using list pattern matching in net 462. There's that. And then we drag drop onto master, which will let us push and create a PR. Benjamin, you're awesome. You're awesome. Thank you. Okay, so we're going to let that guy go. I'm going to come over here. Auto merge. And great. Okay, so let's take a quick gander at what. And I'm just going to do something very bad and blindly download someone else's code. Mostly because I know where to find Benjamin if I need to. Quick. I would need to move this real quick into a different location. Standing by, standing by, standing by. Here we go. Okay. Benjamin, which .NET new template did you use? I approve. I'm just impressed. It's unusual to see somebody stand up something so complete like this. Hang on. Is this my template? Would you like to open this project? Yes. My console benchmark one. I deleted the benchmark project. I was gonna say this is clearly a template. Nobody does a sample app with this level of detail. Yeah. Left the benchmark.net ones. I probably could have gathered that, but that's actually a nice benchmark.net one. You should drop a link to your .NET new template in here. This is one of the things that I actually gave feedback to Microsoft on is I don't feel like .NET new templates are discoverable enough. Like most of the time people find them due to readmes on a GitHub or a link or docs or somewhere. Like that do people realize you can actually do like .NET new search, right? Right? You can go searching for templates and find third-party templates out here, right? Like that is a thing you can do, right? It is unclear to me how you get something added into this list, but you can actually go and search for templates. A little disappointed that mine doesn't even show up in here, but at some point I need to research into what the magical incantation is to make stuff show up. Okay. Let's take a look. Quick start benchmark.net. Yeah. Like, I mean, it looks like you laid it out very similar to how I did my template repo. So I can't fault you there. It looks good. Sweet. Okay. Anyway. Let's take a look. So this is a program here, right? This is program test. And let me just check here. So the key things here is we have dependency injection. Let's see. You doing your first one was me learning the depths of template and made me create my own first one. Oh, good. Oh, good. I like hearing that. Okay, so we've got basic auto mocker type stuff. Let's see. And we have this guy here. Why did I not see? Does this guy have? Wait, how are you getting a DB context in? I'm confused. Where did this DB context come from? Oh, you just made it up. Not real. That's why I'm confused. I'm looking for EF core going, what the heck? Where is EF core? Okay. Okay, so we're gonna pretend like let's see. Pretend this is a real EF or DB context, right? And the key thing here is I'm gonna add this in, right? Just to because in real life the The DB context is disposable. Okay, so setup for the questions and the problems. So imagine yourself working on a project. You have AutoMocker because you've watched my stream too much and you love it, or you're me, either one. And you also have EF Core, and you find yourself wanting to write some tests over a class that takes in a DB context, probably as a dependency. That's a very common thing to set up, especially in like a web API project, right? You've got some service or something in your web API project, and that service takes in a DB context. It does something. Um, oh yeah, you did forget to add it. Right? So primary constructor, away we go. And so the idea is you want to do a test of that thing and figure out, okay, how do I actually test this? Right? How do I inject my DB context? It's like, well, AutoMocker is great. Let's go through and do it. And so there's a couple weird patterns that start to come about with it. So a few things for AutoMocker for people who haven't seen it. AutoMocker is a library built around the mock MOQ library, and its purpose in life is to decouple your tests from your constructor. Because, for example, in this case, if you add a constructor parameter, you don't want to have to go and touch every test that instantiates one of these classes. Typically, you don't invoke constructors in a DI situation that often, especially the things that you would be testing, right? You typically don't use AutoMocker for something that's not DI. It's usually there to kind of take the place of DI in the unit test and populate all your constructor parameters with mocks. That's auto mocking, right? But then when you add a constructor parameter, it can just inject a new mock for you. You're off to the races, and you only have to touch the tests that are related to that particular dependency, not every single test that touches that class. Preferable, especially if you have a good suite of tests. The problem comes with setups like this. For a DB context, especially with EF Core, it's quite common to set it up with like maybe a SQLite in-memory database. It's quick, it's fast, may not have all the features, but for a lot of stuff, you can test it fairly efficiently that way. EF, leaky abstraction, we're going to ignore that, at least for the moment. But then the question is what to do this with AutoMocker. And then more importantly, we are developers, and so we have this default setting that says, I want to go through and keep everything dry. I don't want to have to repeat any code. Dry is a good aspiration, but it's also worth noting it gets developers into trouble a lot because sometimes duplicating code is good, right? There are times where duplication is actually the right answer. A common case is if things are expected to rev at different rates, duplicate, right? That's an easy rule to kind of follow. Oftentimes it's like, well, these are the same right now. It's like, yes, right now. Oftentimes developers go, well, these are the same, therefore I should do dry and I shouldn't have two copies. It's like, yeah, they're the same now, but are they going to stay the same in the future, right? And so the answer is no, you should switch it. So this is a setup that I see happen quite a bit where people like to set up AutoMocker as a field or a property on their test and kind of initialize it once in a constructor. That way, because the alternative is, right, and often, and this is actually the way I tend to write more tests, right, is public async task to test, right? I will oftentimes just initialize AutoMocker directly at the beginning of my test, right? Straight up. And to some degree, this is a little bit of an XUnit thing as well, because XUnit uses the constructor of your test class as your test initializer, right? There's also iasync lifetime if you need to async stuff as part of an initializer. But in general, the constructor is where you do your setup stuff before you run the test. Very simple. In this case, it's kind of obfuscated a little bit because there's a base class. And in fact, I'm just going to put this guy onto the right here for a moment, just so we can see him side by side. But setting up AutoMocker and instantiating it in your constructor isn't bad, right? There's nothing inherently wrong with doing this with AutoMocker per se. The fact that these aren't read only indicates a bit of a scary thing to me, because they should be able to be read only. If they aren't read only, you're probably going to shoot yourself in the foot. Um, but here's where the subtle problems start to creep in. One of the things that I often tell people to avoid doing is don't register things inside of AutoMocker that you aren't going to use in every class. Right? Like it's common for me to see people go, well, okay, so I'm about to do this work, right? And so I want to do mocker dot setup dot, iService. Don't have a service yet. We're gonna make it a thing. Public interface iService, right? Void foo, because I'm way too lazy to think, right? So we say I want to set up iService, and I want to do, I want to set x.foo. Let's make this return something, just make the example a little more meaningful. And for all of my tests, I want this to return 42. Tell it the return type is int. Returns. Right, so now every time I use this, I go through and do this. And this effectively creates a mock and puts that mock inside of AutoMocker, which AutoMocker is functionally just a dictionary, right? If you do mocker.resolved objects, you are literally looking at a dictionary. This is all the stuff that it's keeping track of for you. All the things it's had to instantiate, whether things that you've put into it or things that it's put in as part of creating something else for you. It keeps track of all those resolved objects, which is cool. We like that. That's its purpose in life. The problem with over registering things is it then means that in your tests, if you do that and then you get down lower and you do something like mocker verify all, right? And mocker verify all says, hey, go through and invoke the verify all method on every mock. Okay, well, that's great. So if I look at mock of t, what does that method do? All right, so if I do iService and I do mock dot verify all, right, boom, boom, boom. If we look at this guy's docs, verifies all expectation regardless of whether they've been flagged as verifiable. Well, that seems good, right? It verifies that this setup here was actually invoked. So if I do mocker verify all, this test will now start failing at this assert because it says, oh, well, you told me to expect a call to foo on iService, but that never happened. Great. Like verify all is oftentimes used as an assertion, which is cool. But it is now limiting. The moment you put something like this into a base class or shared method, you now eliminate your ability to actually leverage all of AutoMocker because you're like, well, I don't want it to actually behave like a container for my mocks. I want it to behave like a DI container. And what I mean by that is a DI container, you register all your stuff in, and it doesn't care if you don't use it all. AutoMocker actually kind of cares if you use it all. It's kind of like AutoMocker gets to the end and goes, hang on, I've got extra Lego pieces sitting here, right? You get to step 87 and you realize, shoot, why do I have extra pieces? This isn't right. Right? So I'll put it this way. Treat AutoMocker like a pack of Legos. And I know they sometimes come with extras, but pretend like they don't. Right? And so over-registering kind of runs you into that problem of it's sort of using it the wrong way. Right? So that's problem one. Two, it's just wasteful, right? You're creating things and doing setup and causing stuff that's not needed, and it's not going to slow your test down much, but it's not zero. It's something greater than zero. Okay, next problem that we run into, and this one shows up usually, AutoMockers Legos don't walk on Legos, it hurts. Yes, correct. Don't run barefoot with Legos. That is a bad idea. The other thing that comes around with this, and this is most prevalent with EF Core, right? But it happens anywhere, is anytime you're going to shove an iDisposable instance into AutoMocker, right? AutoMocker is actually rather helpful with iDisposable instance, right? So if I were to do this here, what I would probably want to do is something like using var underscore gets mocker as disposable, right? So what this line here does, or I should say what the as disposable line does, is it actually says, okay, AutoMocker, give me something that's going to represent your lifetime. And when this, and I'm going to call it, you know, dog, for lack of better words, disposable will be confusing. So when dog gets disposed, what dog actually does is it goes through all of those resolved objects inside of AutoMocker and calls the dispose method on them. Because oftentimes you want to actually dispose of everything. And especially if AutoMocker creates disposable instances, you may never actually see them as part of the code that you write in your test. Because, for example, when you call mocker create instance, if this is a concrete class, AutoMocker is happy to do recursive stuff. And it will go through and it will create one of these things up for you, which is cool, except for it creates a disposable thing up, caches it in a dictionary, and then nothing's ever actually calling dispose on it, right? And then sometimes in your test that doesn't matter, right? It doesn't really matter if dispose gets called on some of the stuff because it's a test. It goes away, and usually you're okay. But there's a lot of cases where that's not true, right? Like a DB context is a great example where you really should be cleaning it up. And the basic premise is he who creates it is the one who should dispose of it. And so AutoMocker's way of dealing with that is to give you a method to say, okay, give back a disposable that's going to represent how long until I dispose everything inside of AutoMocker. Just like verify all, how it rips through all of the resolved services and says, okay, I'm going to call verify all on them. As disposable, it's going to rip through all of the resolved services and say, okay, any of these things that are iDisposable, I call dispose on. And it's going to go through and clean them up, which is great, right? That's what you want to have a way of cleaning this up. The problem is there's no real clean way for AutoMocker. Like, we looked at trying to be able to do something like, using var dog as AutoMocker and just let AutoMocker be disposable. This gets problematic because there's a lot of analyzers that will flag you if you have a disposable instance and you don't call dispose on it. And we're like, well, we don't actually know at compile time whether AutoMocker should be disposable or not. We only know if it should be disposable if you put something that's iDisposable into it, right? And mocks aren't disposable, right? Mock of T is not a disposable type. So the default behavior is it's probably like AutoMocker itself, the class, isn't iDisposable most of the time. It's only disposable if you put a disposable thing into it. But if you put a disposable thing into it, you're on the hook for disposing it, right? And if it puts the disposable thing in it, you're still kind of on the hook for it. And there was no real good way to communicate this up. And this is something Adam and I discussed quite a bit of what's the proper API. And this was the closest thing we could come to of, at the end of the day, only the developer knows what actually needs to be cleaned up. We contemplated having it like throw if it hit the destructor and there was a disposable instance in it. We're like, that's not right either because like HTTP client is technically iDisposable, but you don't call dispose on it. It's like, nah, we're going to leave it in the developer's hands and trust the developer to do the right thing. But for AppDB context, for a real EF core context, you should be disposing of it when you're done with it. That's important, right? Because underneath this is going to be a connection, and the connection needs to be closed, right? We're going to ignore the in-memory provider, which is probably the only exception, but it's not a good provider to use anyway. Use the SQLite in-memory if you're doing that. Don't use the in-memory provider. It's a horrible test. It's fast, but it's like, don't use it if you care at all about it behaving like a database in any way. Regardless. So this is the intent behind it. And this is why putting in AppDB context into something like a base class gets really problematic, right? So for example, this in DB scope or in database scope here, you'll note there are two scopes two contexts being created. One is mocker.get, which will kick back context 1, right? And then context 2 is this guy right here, where it's creating a scope, acting on that, and then calling an action, but it's also caching it inside of AutoMocker. And this is really dangerous, right? The moment you put something into AutoMocker, AutoMocker's going to use it. Like if you say mocker use, AutoMocker goes, yes, sir, I use this instance. The problem is AutoMocker really only knows about one instance at a time, given type. Like this dictionary that it has, Mocker resolved objects, you'll note it is keyed on type. Dang it. Press the button too quickly. Right? Resolved object. Give me. Right? It is keyed on type. So given a particular type, there is only one object that it's holding on to for that type. That's it. So like a DI container has like singleton scope and transient and all that. Yeah. AutoMocker has singleton. That's it. Singleton. And there's technically things with the resolvers that you can do to get kind of a transient behavior type situation, but functionally, AutoMocker just has singletons. Goes, you ask for a thingy, I give you the thingy. The issue with this use here is it's going to create a context. It's going to shove it into AutoMocker. And then somewhere down the line, someone's going to use it, right? We're going to ignore this lambda for the moment, right? Which is fine, except for nothing's disposing of it, right? Something really should be disposing of, which means something like this. And by hiding this inside of a base class, you're then kind of positing that, well, maybe this, if I'm going to do this, like iTest base should probably then be disposable, right? Because if my base class is going to inject this, right, I should, and we are not going to, so for reference, don't do what I just did, right? When it asks you which way you want to implement the interface, the with dispose pattern is almost always the right answer, right? Don't do this. Okay, with that said, I'm doing this, right? Just prove this, right? So you probably want to do as disposable dispose. But then the question is, do you really want to do this every time? Right? Like this guy doesn't actually inject the context every time. He's only going to inject it on this call. Well, maybe I should inject it every time. Well, but if I inject it every time, now I might be over-registering things in AutoMocker and just making my life more difficult for no reason. Right? So that's kind of the issue here of having a shared AutoMocker instance. And again, there's nothing actually wrong with this, but the reason I generally will initialize at the beginning of my test rather than in a shared variable is it makes it really hard for people to accidentally do the wrong thing. It's doing it this way saves me one line of code in my test. Or I should say, doing it this way saves me one line of code in my test. Doing it this way makes it hard for people to mess up. And I'm currently in the camp of make it hard for people to mess up, right? People like to copy and paste. This leads them down the path of correct. By coincidence, this one requires them to know something. So it's like, don't always trust people to know the things. Okay, now let's talk about this one here, right? So we're gonna ignore this because this bad because over registering and requires you to do some disposing of somewhere and who knows where, right? Kind of maybe in this area. So then we talk about this one. So this one's doing a create service scope, right? It got a service provider. We're going to ignore how it got the service provider. That's inconsequential. But it has a service provider, creates a scope. From that scope, it uses the scope service provider to retrieve the DB context, right? There's actually a bug here because this should really be using, right? So this should be once again, if you create the context, you should dispose the context, right? But there's a question. Maybe because we're putting it in here, maybe we want to rely on this to dispose, right? That feels wrong, right? I really don't like patterns where one thing creates the thing and then somewhere else it's going to rely on some other thing to dispose of it, right? That's a recipe for disaster because it requires left hand and right hand to stay in sync by wishful thinking, right? It's like, that makes me twitchy, right? There's places where that kind of thing happens, but in general, it's not great structure, right? So it creates the context, and we're going to just move this thing down because it doesn't matter. But the important thing here is it has this callback delegate, right? This func. This func takes in the DB context, and this is basically a void returning async method because the func here is saying, well, the delegate I'm expecting should have a task return type, which means when I invoke this, I expect a task back, right? And so this guy here, in fact, does the thing, right? He's not asynchronous, but he is coming in here. You'll note, once again, we kind of run into the problem of there's another mocker.use. So this DB context is actually going to get shoved into the mocker twice. That's extra. So yeah, don't do that. In fact, I don't remember what it does if you shove the same instance in multiple times. It might just be last in wins. Yeah, it's last in wins. So if you call use multiple times with the same instance, it can potentially overwrite. And that's another thing that can bite you, right? If you have a disposable instance inside your AutoMocker instance, right? And let's say we were doing this and we're like, oh, this is fine. We're putting it inside of AutoMocker, but we're going to dispose of it over here, right? This is left hand, this is right hand, right? And we're assuming that, oh, I put it into AutoMocker. I tell AutoMocker to clean up its disposable instances. What's the problem? Well, this thing overwrites it. This instance is no longer inside of AutoMocker by the time we get here, and it never gets cleaned up properly. Right? That's one of those left hand, right hand things that really hoses people. Which is the entire reason we have the using keyword. Because getting this right was hard, and so we needed language help. I think it was probably in the language from the beginning or very close to the beginning. Anyway, so this does a callback, and then this thing is allowed to go through and do stuff inside of this database scope. And the idea with this callback is this context is only going to be valid as long as this scope is valid, right? As soon as this scope goes out of scope, pun intended, right? As soon as we pass this closing curly brace, this variable gets disposed. Well, a DI scope will dispose of all of the scope level instances. I emphasize scope level instances, which is why I say that not having a using here is kind of wrong. Because if this guy is registered scoped, just having the using on the scope will call dispose on it. If it's registered singleton, it won't. Right? If it's registered transient, it won't. Like that's that. So and I think if we look up here, it was registered scoped. So this technically works to dispose of the DB context, but if I were to go add transient, yeah, it won't. So now it's broken, right? Which is why it should always be he who creates is he who cleans up, right? And in general, the point of having the DI container do this stuff is so that you don't have to think about object lifetime. We don't want to have to clean things up. We want it to do all of the work for us and then tell us when things are done. Anyway, going through. So the idea with this callback is so that the life of this value here gets cleaned up. And ideally has nothing really to do with AutoMocker. So inside of database scope was largely created because quite often what you'll find in a test like that is you want to have one scope up in your act and one scope down in your assert, right? Assert things. And the reason for doing this is because with EF core, the DB context maintains a local collection of things, right? If you look on your DB sets, there's a .local property that sits on them. And that's intentionally there for things like WPF or thick client apps to be able to data bind to because it's an observable collection, which is really cool, right? It's got this whole local cache idea built into it so that you can grab it. How that plays out in most cases practically is people get bit because The DB context, maybe if you don't call save changes and you requery it with the same DB context instance, you get back your modified entity, which is cool, right? It's like, oh yeah, look, it created the object. But if you don't actually call save changes on your DB context, it never actually gets persisted. And so the best way to check that is to have your arrange, act, and assert portions of your test not share the same DB context, right? So if you're using SQLite in memory, those DB contexts may share the same connection object to connect to that in-memory database, but they're different DB contexts, which means the internal caching of the DB context doesn't bite you, right? You don't care what the act portion of the test did, because your assert portion is going to get a brand new DB context, and so there isn't going to be anything cached in it. So you are free to query, and you're only going to get persistent objects, not something that may still be in flight. There are other ways to check on your DB context if something's been persisted. You can always pull the entity off of it and say, okay, what's the state of this entity, right? Is it modified, added, etc., right? Don't do that. That is a bigger pain in the neck. So for hey Izzy, welcome. At the moment, we are discussing a unit testing strategy with EF Core and AutoMocker because it came up earlier today, and so I'm killing two birds with one stone, because if I answer Benjamin's question here, I don't have to answer it tomorrow. We work together, if that wasn't obvious. So he did up a little sample that represents kind of what he was looking at before. But that's the big idea, is arrange, act, and assert should probably have different DB context instances. And this method here should probably not be inserting anything into AutoMocker at all. This guy should probably not exist, right? And this guy here may or may not matter, right? So this being inside of, like, I assume the whole point of this use here is so that this guy's constructor, who takes in an AppDB context, has it injected, right? That I assume that was the intent behind it, right? Which is probably okay, probably. Boy, I wish I should go and look. So there's a way I've solved this in the past, and I should probably go and grab it. No, what I should do is I should add it in. I should add it into the AutoMocker library as a source generated thing. That's what I should do. That is the solution. Because this is a problem that I think more than one person has, and I solved it with a resolver. And I don't know if that's quite the right thing. So this guy here could be valid. It's weird that this is going in here like this, right? So the presence of a service provider alongside AutoMocker is a little weird, because, pro tip, I service provider. Let's see, I service provider, right? P gets AutoMocker implements I service provider. So like it can play the role. Now, AutoMocker does not support things like create scope. You try create scope on P, and it's no good. It's no worky. Right? That's not a thing, because again, AutoMocker has a dictionary that's keyed on type. It doesn't have a concept of scoped instances, and there's a little bit of debate of even if we should. Right? We added in the iService provider, and I think that as an implementing interface on AutoMocker, and this may have been one of the bigger mistakes we ever made. Because before, what was happening is we're having to wrap it. Like you wrap AutoMocker up inside of another class that implements iService provider. And we're like, well, maybe we should do it like iDisposable, where you have to make an explicit call to get back an iService provider. And we're like, well, what's the big deal, right? Like, iService provider is a very, very simple interface, right? Like, This is not a hard interface to implement. We're like, it feeds in a type, it gives back an object, right? This is the entire interface. AutoMocker has a dictionary, right? Resolved objects, right? It takes in a type, gives back an object. Boy, that looks like a real easy way to implement iService Provider. Just feed the item out of the dictionary. The thing that ended up being the biggest controversy of trying to figure out whether we should implement that or not was, yes, we can implement the interface very trivially with our internal dictionary. The problem is, you'll note Service Provider has this create scope thing here. And this was the ultimate difficulty, right? Is things in the dependency injection namespace come with oodles and gobs of extension methods on them. And people write oodles and gobs of extension methods. And they expect stuff like this to work, right? And so every several months, we usually get a bug in the AutoMocker library where somebody makes a comment like, oh, create scope doesn't work. We're like, yeah, there's no service scope factory registered in it, right? Whereas up here, you get that for free because you did new service collection, right? And then build service provider. There's certain things that the Microsoft DI library just kind of bundles into that list for you that you didn't have to think about, which is great, right? We like that. We like that there are things being provided for us, but it's not, and I think structure where they do it. I can't remember where it is. There is a place where they get added, and I don't remember where it is. I found it at one point. But we like that behavior we get for free, but now AutoMocker kind of breaks that contract because it, even though it's an iService provider, it doesn't behave like it. And I'm willing to bet this thing here, this setup here, was all around just having the idea of being able to use the DI extension methods to build up the DB context, right? Because all of the EF stuff comes with a lot of nice extension methods for like service collection, add DB context, right? Add DB context is something, right? Oh, dang nabbit. Add Copilot. Or probably IntelliCode, right? There's things like this, and then you can do, connection string, right? And things like this just work. And so if you use the DI stuff, it's really, really easy to get this service provider out. But then you kind of run into this kind of weird situation all the way through here. So I will give, this is not going to be a complete solution, but I will comment a little bit of how I solved it. So I'll go over here and do it. Public class DB resolve. Right? iMock resolver. Okay. So iMock resolver is an interface from the AutoMocker library. And this is effectively your way of being able to inject behavior into AutoMocker, not just instances, but behavior. Because sometimes you want to control how things get resolved, or sometimes you want lazy resolution of types. This is a way of doing resolution of known types in a base class without actually adding them to that dictionary, right? At least until they're needed. So what we could do is if context dot requested type equals type of what is it? App db context, right, and then we go context dot value gets this, right? Or we could even circle back and build up something different, right? Because inside of here we can do context dot automarker dot get, right? We can recurse in. Now you need to be careful because these resolvers get called on every request into AutoMocker. So if you call create instance, get, etc., you're going to fall into this list of resolvers. And so you make like if you start recursively calling into AutoMocker from in a resolver, make sure you don't get yourself in a loop. Like that happens every so often where it does bad things and then you don't work and you spin forever, right? But if you assign a value to context, this allows lazy resolution of it. Uh, uh, should we get it out of the service provider on the resolver, or is that just continuing the same problem? It's kind of continuing the same problem, right? I assume you're going down the service provider because it gives you an easy way of creating up the DB context, right? That is somewhat likely the use case. And I think if I remember correctly, let me go look. Sorry, my PR failed, and now I'm unhappy. Real quick at what this failed on. Test. Please don't be the test. I think be a little. Whoa, that's not a normal test that I fail. That's interesting. Okay. There is a bug in AutoMocker that I was gonna go and fix. So specifically, there is an issue here. This, I think, this has an outstanding PR. I need to go kick at him. Yeah, there's an outstanding PR for it. Yeah. So right now, there is kind of a minor issue. Um, that when you have a resolver, depending on how you add it, your result can get cached. What I mean by that, right? So let's finish out this example, right? If I do mocker dot resolvers dot add db resolver, right? This is wrong, right? This will, because one would hope that this would give me transient type behavior, right? That I would get back different appdb context. Let's prove a point, right? Var one gets mocker get app db context, right? Var two gets that. Okay, Copilot, what am I thinking? Here's your hint. Cert? No, not equal. There, you got close, right? This test should fail. This test should fail. Didn't even check to make sure that this is filed. Now, did it fail for the reason I expected is the next question. Values are equal. Good. We got back the same instance both times. Right? Okay? So, bad. Better. Resolvers insert new DB resolver. This test here passes. Right? Okay. So this is where the API on AutoMocker gets a little hazy, and we left the resolvers in as an escape hatch for people to do cool things, but it kind of requires people to understand how AutoMocker is working to use it effectively. And that's what that issue was that I had logged is this, in my opinion, because I got bit by doing this one day in my day job. Basically, I did the bad case and wasn't thinking, and I thought I was getting a new instance every time, and then I chased my tail thinking I had two separate instances until I realized I'm an idiot. That's the same instance, right? Like, but I did a resolver. Oh, and then I realized my mistake. Okay, so if we look at what happens in the AutoMocker constructor, resolvers is initialized to a new list of thingies, right? And you'll note there's a cache resolver, a self resolver, an array resolver, an enumerable, a lazy, a func, a cancellation token. So if you've ever seen AutoMocker just like populate something for you, you're like, oh, thank you. That's exactly what I wanted. Yeah, it's because of one of these resolvers that's built in. Because there's certain things like cancellation token. If we see a cancellation token in a constructor, we can kind of figure out what you probably intended. And we can like shove a cancellation token value in, and we'll even be a little smarter and say, you know what? If you've told us about a cancellation token source, what you probably want is the token off that source. Like, we can be mildly intelligent about seeing cancellation token, right? Which is convenient, right? We wanted that kind of behavior. The problem being, right? So if we look at mocker resolved objects, you'll note I keep saying AutoMocker has a dictionary. AutoMocker actually doesn't have a dictionary. Right? This type map here, if we go and look at it, this type map is calling into the resolvers, finding the first resolver that's a cache resolver, and returning the type map off of that. You can technically turn off all of the caching of AutoMocker by deleting this resolver. This resolver is only here for the purpose of maintaining this dictionary. That's its sole purpose in life. And because we couldn't break back compat because of some of the APIs, or at least we didn't want to break back compat, this is why you see that weird implementation where inside of the AutoMocker instance itself, we then reach into this type map and pull the resolver out and do all of this stuff with the cache resolver. Because it's like, well, we kind of want to do it, but if you want to get rid of all caching, you can just drop the cache resolver out. And in that case, AutoMocker goes from singleton behavior to transient every single time. Always just going to fall through it. Because when you ask for something from AutoMocker, what it ends up doing, right? This try resolve is exactly what happens. You end up falling into here. The service type is what you requested, or one of its dependencies because it's recursive, right? It checks if it's already seen the type, and if so, it goes, yeah, we've got ourselves in a circle, bail. Like, we can't do anything for you. We're lost, right? You can't have service have a dependency of itself, right? We just go round and round and round forever, and that doesn't work. Right? So when we log it, we create a resolution context, and then we iterate over the resolvers. Right? We literally go through every resolver and we say, did that resolver provide a value to us? If we didn't get a value, well, we go, oops, couldn't find, like, no one provided a value, I give up. Right? Otherwise, if we got back a value, we have to do some funky stuff around if it's a mock or not. But other than that, that's it. Like, that's the sum total of how AutoMocker works. There's a bunch of resolvers, and for each type, it just drops through the list and says what's the first resolver to give me a value, which is why this order matters, right? Typically, if you've called .use, you've put it into the cache resolver, and the cache resolver goes, I got you, right? And it just works. Beautiful. Beautiful resolver. But some of these other ones, right, like array resolver, right? It can go through and it can say, oh, okay, based upon the type of element array that you want, I might be able to go through and create a mock array instance for you and be able to populate that up. Like, that's a thing I can probably do. But that's all AutoMocker is a list of resolvers that it uses to populate with. So the API issue that I logged, I was like, it would be really nice if inside of these resolvers had a way of indicating should this value be cached or not, right? Like, context, no cache gets true, or something to that effect, right? It might be nice because then this resolver can say, I don't care, right, where this list is, don't cache my value, right? Because right now, if it were possible to turn off the caching behavior, this guy could then work, right? Because anything AutoMocker returns back will get cached, right? Like this guy here, even though this is working, right? So let's prove a point real quick. Oh, I probably shouldn't do it. Right, so if we go, let's actually catch it here. Right, so if we debug this, step in. Right, so we're gonna look at instance 1, and I'm going to open up my watch window. Right, or where's my locals? We'll use locals instead. I apologize for the small font size. We'll fix it in a moment. Right, so I'm gonna hit right click on the 1 instance, and I'm gonna hit make object ID. Right, so what this does is you'll note it adds this little $1 And now anywhere in my debugger where I look at this instance, I will see $1. Right? It gives you an easy way to identify this instance, regardless if you look at it from somewhere else. So if we look at Mocker itself and we look at resolved objects, we can see that it has one item, right? It's keyed on the type, right? But it is in fact my $1. And then if I step over and I resolve 2, right? You'll note 1 and 2 are different instances, right? So down here, right, does not have the $1 on it. So if I right click on number 2 and hit make object ID, I get $2, right? So now I can see that each of these are separate values. But if I look at my cache here, right, I can see that this guy is still cached in there, right? So I've got myself into this weird situation where I'm not actually tracking this. And it would be much nicer to be able to say, hey, you know what? Don't even cache, right? I've been missing object ID my entire life. Yes, this is that's what I should do. Okay, pro tip. The Microsoft Build Conference is coming up. Microsoft Build Conference. And it's free for online attendees. So if you haven't done so, go ahead and register. I don't think they've listed sessions yet. Yeah, they haven't. But a very common session that comes up most years is they have like a visual studio. Sometimes they call it tips and tricks. Sometimes they call it debugging features. I watch that session every year, because I feel like I'm somewhat competent with Visual Studio. There is always at least one tidbit of knowledge in that session that's new to me every year. So, sign up for MS Build. At least do the online attendee thing because it's free. Why not? You get access to the session, and usually there's like digital manager swag. Yeah, convince your manager letter. Yeah, I will say the convince your manager is mostly for the like it's worth my time to attend in person, because I think it's like 2,100 something in person, but right now they're running like $300 off for an early bird special, or don't quote me on the numbers. It's something like that. There was something like that at least several days ago. Might still be going. Don't remember. But like 1,800 something early bird, 2,100 full ticket price. And it's limited too because it's at the Seattle Convention Center and the fire marshal only allows so many people in the building. So they can only sell so many physical in-person tickets before the fire marshal says, no, you can't have any more people in here. So there's a little bit of that. But yes, object ID, wonderful feature. But that's the idea, is to allow having something in here that would let us not cache these things, so that then the cache resolver's position in the array would become less impactful. Right? That's the idea, is where do you want that cache resolver to be, or if you want to turn it off. Because there's so the other way, so just to be clear, this no worky, right? Right? But if we do mocker.resolvers.remove at 0, which happens to be our cache resolver, guess what happens? Woo! We go green again, right? So because now I've turned off the caching, so there's literally no caching in AutoMocker whatsoever, which means things like the use method will then fail and various things like that. So you can get very abusive in doing this. So the way I solved the DB context problem was generally through something like this. Specifically, the resolver then contained things like the wow, my PR continued to fail. Sorry. Usually this resolver would do things like spin up the SQLite DB connection object, and then inject it into all instances that it returns. Right? So that's kind of a convenient thingy to have happen, to say, yeah, I want all of my instances to share here. But this is also a resolver that I should probably look at just putting into the AutoMocker library, because we have been adding in APIs like that via source generators, so that if you add AutoMocker into a library and we see that that library is referencing, in this case, EF, we would gen up the extension methods for AutoMocker to support EF. And then we deal with injecting the resolvers and all of that. And all you have to do is call the, add DB context or something to that effect. We've oftentimes stolen the names straight off of the extension methods that people are used to, just so that it's a plus and a minus. On one hand, it feels very familiar to people who are used to the dependency injection library. On the other hand, it makes them treat AutoMocker like a dependency injection library, and you really shouldn't, right? AutoMocker can serve the role of it, but this is one of those cases that just because it quacks like a duck, it's not a duck. It's a duck. It's a fake duck. It is a duck substitute, like the plastic ducks that the hunters use to attract the real ducks. That is AutoMocker, fake duck. So, but to answer to go back to the original question of how should we handle doing this? So, in DB context scope should probably return back a new DB context instance. Your something should be handling cleaning up those instances at the end of your test, pass or fail, right? Inside of XUnit, that could be disposable. This in DB context scope should probably avoid, like, this here by itself is not a horrible implementation, right? Especially if you've done a service collection up here and you've spun it. Because the idea is this in DB or in database scope async should create a new DB context instance. It should pass it back through to the delegate, and then it should clean up the instance that it gave. Because once you leave this in DB or in database scope async, right? Once you get outside of that method, this appdb context should be disposed of. There's no reason it should live, right? So that's the intent. And then the only question is how to properly create this. And leveraging AutoMocker is one way of doing it. My big hesitation with letting AutoMocker always manage it is that means AutoMocker, because its dictionary is inherently one thing given a type in its cache, it's probably going to hose you on making sure you've cleaned everything up. Right? The other thing that you could do is you could store a collection and make sure it's cleaned up, right? Like, I think the full implementation that I did on mine looks something closer to this, right? And again, implement iDisposable properly, not like the way I'm about to show you, right? So you can do something like this, where it comes in here, and again, this assumes that somebody's going to be doing mocker as disposable, right? But if you want to do private list app db context gets new, right? You could do this, and you could do var context gets new app db context, right? You can add it into a list and then you can return it. Doesn't work. That doesn't work. That doesn't work, right? Boom, boom, boom. There we go. So, and then inside of here, you could do, rip through your, yeah. Thank you, Copilot. That's exactly what I want, right? So you could clean it up here. And so then the only question is, well, hang on, what's actually going to call this, right? Like, I've got a disposable thingy. Well, so there's nothing stopping you when this comes in, right? Going context, like if context got resolve AutoMocker resolved objects. This is not a great implementation, but right? But we can do something akin to this. Like if it doesn't contain it, context, uh, automarker use this, right? And if you really want to trust your callers to not like do something really funky, right? You can even go as far as to omit the check and just blindly say, you know what? Nobody should ever be adding two instances of this resolver ever, right? Like that's a very easy way to do it. And in fact, I sometimes go as far as to write extension methods that are responsible for doing this kind of logic here, right? Of checking for the presence of a resolver and then inserting it at the right index where I want. Because oftentimes I will try to find the index of the cache resolver and just insert the at that index, right? So that mine comes in before the cache resolver. But now if we do this, this will actually, and this is now wrong because we need to do using, oh, I'm glad it's figured out that I like calling my disposable here, right? We have AutoMocker. We add the resolver, and then the resolver, when let's see, you explain context AutoMocker, use this again. Yeah. So we have AutoMocker. We set up a disposable so that at the end of our test, pass or fail, right? This is going to have its dispose method called, and this dispose will clean up all resolved objects that AutoMocker is tracking that implement iDisposable, right? So this handles the fancy case. We come into here, we call AutoMocker use on this, and again, the risk factor with blindly doing it is if there's already a different DB resolver instance in here, it's going to overwrite it. But the question is anybody ever going to ever accidentally insert this resolver twice? Maybe that's not a big risk factor, right? Like, Again, I usually don't do this directly in my tests. I usually write an extension on AutoMocker that's something like mocker add DB support, right? And this extension method will handle inserting the resolver or maybe checking if the resolver is there and then only insert it if it's not and all that jazz, right? Whatever. Right? So the first time that we call AutoMocker get of appdb context, we're going to come into this resolve method on the resolver and we inject the resolver as a resolved object, right? This is kind of a weird thing to do because it's like, wait, no one needs this as a resolved object. The only thing that actually needs it as a resolved object is this disposable. Because remember, its purpose in life is to rip through the known objects and clean up any of them that it knows about. So we just inject ourselves in, and now we're a known object that implements iDisposable. That's the criteria met, right? So we inject ourselves, we go through and we do the add DB context stuff, right? We could even go a little further and say, you know what, we know we don't need to do this unless we're injecting something, right? Like there's no point in doing this. And we could even go as far as to say, if, DB context dot count is 0, right? This is our first time in, right? Only do this on the first time. It's mildly wasteful on subsequent calls because it's like, yeah, we're adding something that we know we've already added. It's like whatever. So we come in here, we add ourselves in, and then we create the new DB context, add it to our list, close out, right? Great. We come to our second get, we fall into that exact same code path, except for we are not counting 0. So we knew this up, add it to the list. Great. Do the test, right? Pass the test, fail the test, whatever. And then we get down to here, and then dispose occurs, right? And this as disposable rips through all of the known objects, of which case now there's 2, right? There's the cached appdb context that we saw earlier, and then there is also the resolver that is now in 2 places. It's both in the resolvers collection as well as in the known objects list. And since it's in the known objects list, it then ends up having its dispose method called. And then it can promptly forward the disposing of all of those appdb contexts and clean all of those up as well. Right? And make sure that that actually occurs properly. This is also a case where you can make the resolver, like in the case of a SQLite connection inside of EF, you can have the resolver hold on to that connection object and clean it up for you as well. So I've leveraged this trick a number of times where I implement iDisposable, and emphasis on implement iDisposable properly. Don't just do it like this. But taking the resolver and shoving the resolver into the list of known objects then allows you to leverage this. Now, it is a bit of a risk factor, right? Because this method doesn't work outside of your unit test. Let me rephrase. This method doesn't work outside of your unit test method. Right? You can't really put this in a constructor. You can't really put this in a shared test or in a shared method in a base. Right? Because the scope of this needs to be scoped to the test itself. And this is the hard part is knowing when AutoMocker should be disposable. Let's see, since it's in resolved object, if it gets disposed, that is maybe an argument for a downside of the AutoMocker instance not living in the base class, potentially, since then AutoMocker is still alive and has a disposed resolver. Yeah, and at least with XUnit, there's no real harm in doing a property like this, right? There's no big issue. Like, even if I did it up here, right? And I'll get rid of dog, right? Even if I did the resolver trick on this instance, right? And we just injected it. Because this is XUnit and emphasis on XUnit. XUnit is going to create a new instance of your test class for every test. Your constructor will be called every time. This will be a new instance every time. So it's not bad per se to have a property or a field or something that holds your AutoMocker instance. I've seen people do it a lot, right? They're like, I don't have to repeat this line on every single test. But which is correct, right? This line is duplicated on every single one of the tests that I write. I duplicate that line every single time. Only because by putting it here, it encourages people to do stuff like this. And this is almost always going to be wrong. Not always, but it is rare to me to see some sort of setup on AutoMocker that is actually true for every test. Now, if you have some condition that you need to do to AutoMocker that is true for every test in your class, this is perfectly fine, right? This is absolutely perfectly fine. What I find, though, is often when I see these setups are true for like 70% of the tests in the class, but not for some others. Like, well, we don't actually need that one because we're testing an exception case over here, and we never actually get far enough to call that dependency, so it just doesn't matter. It's like, but now you're setting an expectation of things that aren't occurring. And that causes, in my mind, makes the test harder to read and harder to refactor because you've now done more in your arrange step than is necessary, right? Like, if, for example, if you would squawk in a code review, like, for example, foo is not used anywhere, right? So this method is completely unused. If you would say that this is a bad setup in my test because nothing in the test is actually calling iService foo, but you'd be okay with it in a base class, I would argue that that's wrong, right? It's either okay to just do worthless setups on things that don't matter, or it's not, regardless of whether it's in the test or in the base class, right? That's kind of where I come down on it. Let's see. In that case, wouldn't an extension method being called from each test be a better approach for not repeating code, and then also being called for when you need it and called when tests don't use it? Yes, 100%, absolutely. My absolute favorite thing to do, because it is very common to have a lot of tests that need similar setups, right? It's like, well, I need to set this up so that my test simulates a logged in admin user or whatever, right? And that takes several steps to simulate a logged in admin user or whatever the case might be, right? I love, absolutely love writing extension methods on AutoMarker, right? Add logged in user, right? Most of the projects that I work on, people will find a wealth of extension methods on AutoMarker because that's my way of reusing code. And you don't have to do it there, right? The generalized use case is just write a shared method that does the, like, for whether, if you, even for people not using AutoMarker, right? The basic premise here is if you've got some common setup that you need for a bunch of tests, just put it in a method, right? That method could be public, could be static, right? Make it easy to call. Your test should be easy to work with, and then encapsulate that logic. But keep the amount of stuff that it adds isolated to whatever the method name is, right? If it's add logged in user, only have it add the logged in user. Like, I don't mind seeing, mocker add logged in user, mocker add, I don't know, database, right? I don't mind seeing this type of setup because if I read through this test, I can very clearly see, oh, okay, in order to test this, we need a logged in user and I need a database. Okay, great. I now know something about the prerequisites for going into this test because maybe I'm testing some service that has a dependency on both of those things. Great. That is perfectly fine. I'm very okay with that. And then these methods here, they might do setups on AutoMarker. They might add resolvers. They might do who knows what, right? I don't have to think, right? But I know that these things are needed before I get down to the portion where I'm going to call mocker, create instance of, you know, right? Create my system under test, right? I'll just define where things are. Assert, right? Range, right? Something of that nature, right? Because I know, okay, in order to do this, to test the service class, and I guess this is probably actually up here. So it's going to be, sut do the thing, right? So at some point, I'm going to test do thing, right? And in order to actually create this, either do thing or something about my service class needs a logged in user and an add database. Great. Wrap it up in a shared method. Extension methods are great. Extension methods on AutoMarker are great. I absolutely love them. And build those up. But I do have a desire of building out a DB context one because I want it to support arbitrary DB context. I want it to support IDB context factory, and I want it to be one single resolver for all of it because that's kind of the pattern that we've gone with a lot of cases, right? Which makes life a little bit nicer, right? One last thing I'll show off real quick because I think I'm rather proud of it. The open PR, but I'm going to show the changed code. Okay, so here is the really cool changed code. So this, and you don't need to read it. I'm just showing as an example. This is a constant string, right? This is the test of an iOptions file, and I think I have the whole. I don't actually have it in here. It's this whole file here, but the test shows it better. This is an extension method on AutoMarker called with options to support iOptions, right? So with the next version of AutoMarker, if you have a test class that is referencing the iOptions or the Microsoft extensions.options NuGet package, you will magically see AutoMarker have a with options extension method pop up on it. And it goes through and it registers up all of the relevant types around iOptions, right? It creates an iOptions of the type. It creates the iOptions snapshot, iOptions monitor, iOptions factory. All of those things get registered up so that we don't have to think too hard, and we can have AutoMocker configured the same way the DI thing was. And we do it with source generators because then if people are not referencing iOptions, they don't see this and it just goes away. And there's not separate NuGet packages to install. No, so not reflection. It is. Let's see. I gotta expand it a little bit. It's horribly complex. You'll see in the execute method, it's checking if references options right here. You'll note it's looking for referenced assembly names. Right. So if we come down lower, I believe is where the method is defined. Nope, must be in the middle. There it is. Right. So it literally just rips through the referenced assemblies and says if one of the referenced assemblies starts with Microsoft extensions.options. That's it. That's it. Because in my opinion, what are the odds somebody's referencing an assembly that starts with Microsoft.extensions.options and it's not the NuGet pack? Or it's not something that has the full iOptions suite of code in it, right? That's it. It's no more advanced than that. I've got a branch that I'm working on as well that adds in one more thing for this because I want to have a property you can set in your CS proj that also turns this source generator off, right? Because there was a bug that got reported. Somebody was running our preview packages, and the issue they ran into is they had analyzers turned on that flagged external types that didn't have XML docs on there. And so on my branch, I also am turning this thing down from public to internal as well, because I added the XML docs because we should have XML docs on our external types, and that's an analyzer that AutoMocker has turned on for its normal library, so it should be on for the stuff it generates. There's no reason for that, right? So that's fine. So I added that stuff in as well, but then my next one's going to add a switch to turn it off because this is really nice and will probably work in 99% of the cases for people. But there will be cases where people either don't want it, something's wrong, it's not working right, and they just want it off, right? Don't give it to me. Let me go away, right? And so I want to have an opt-out option for people to say, don't run this. And I think an MS build property in your CS proj is probably the easiest to document. It's kind of my opinion. But who knows? If people have other feedback of how they would rather turn this off, let me know. Happy for feedback. Okay, real quick. I want to go look at why my other PR is failing. Same test. Did I break something? Already active. It looks like it ran properly, but this, okay. I'm a little confused, so go run the test. I don't really understand how my changes broke this. The test has now failed twice on the pipeline, so I won't say conclusively that I didn't break something, but maybe I did. Passes for me locally. That's terrifying. That is utterly terrifying. Let's run all the treeless view tests real quick. Because you'll note these tests also oftentimes will leverage multiple steps. Weird to me that it was the same test every time. That seems unusual. Well, good news is it's passing everything so far. This is also the reason why the pipeline test takes so long is we run this suite of UI, basically full UI tests against the entire material design library. Because it's the only way I know of to actually make sure that the styles and triggers are working properly is to actually test them in a real running app. Like you kind of have to have the WPF rendering pipeline in order to make this kind of thing viable. In retrospect, I probably shouldn't have kicked off this entire test suite. Okay, so everything passes. Oh, everything passes for me. Take one more look here. The other thing that I get with these is if I go back to here, let's look at the failing test and see what it did. Go here. Oh, auto suggest boxes has been problematic a number of times. Might check that again. Free list view. Sadly, not enough to get to MS Conference. Well, you've got some travel expenses too on top of that, Izzy, don't you? It's and I will say this: it's kind of an awkward thing, but for people who actually go to the build conference in person, um, I might actually encourage people not to spend their time going to sessions, right? Because the sessions are going to be live streamed and recorded, right? If you sign up for the digital online only one, you get access to the sessions. Now, some sessions may not be recorded. Sometimes the recording stuff may fail. There's stuff like that. So pick and choose if there's sessions that are really important for you to be at. Like that might be an interesting thing to say, ooh, maybe I should go to that one. But there's a lot of extra stuff there that is kind of only available to the in-person people. Like they've got their expert meetup areas where you can go and talk to people. And I find those to be most valuable, especially for in-person conferences. Like if I go to an in-person conference, I favor going to the ones where I'm not confident that the recording will be perfect, right? Like if it's one of the main keynotes, I'm real confident they're going to have a good recording, a good stream. Sometimes side rooms, smaller ones, right? Like they've only got so many AV groups to go around, and like the smaller rooms with smaller attendees are potentially going to have worse quality recordings. So it's like, yeah, but if it's like, you know, Satya's main keynote, yeah, it's gonna be full on, channel 9 level quality across the board type situation. Like they do high end production values on a lot of this stuff. So yeah. So for people who go in person, my thing is look through the sessions, pick the ones with a high value. We just need a Kaboo booth. Uh, don't joke. Like I was literally at Ignite doing. I won't say meet me booth, but I was staffing some of the expert meetup booths. So they have yet to announce session stuff for build yet. So we'll see what comes. But if there are opportunities available, I will let you know if something comes up. So there will definitely be a thing, but as of now, nothing's been announced yet. This kind of concerns me because this looks like it should work. Like Can replace nested child element with expanded children. It seems like there's a timing problem if I was guessing. And that bothers me a great deal. So I might have to look at. It seems like there is a. Where in this test did it fail? Because it kicked this off. It added 3 children. I'm gonna just. I gotta walk through this test and see where it's failing. Okay, so starting of this test starts off with a tree view with 3 items in it. Uh, Time to sell my left kidney. I would wait until there's an announcement, Izzy. That might be a little aggressive to sell the left kidney. Maybe the right one if you don't care about it. That's a joke. Joke. Just to be clear. Selling kidneys for conferences is probably not a good investment. Especially when the conference literally is offering nearly all of the content free online. Probably not the best investment. Okay, so select second item and add 3 children. So it grabs this item, adds 3 children to it. Great. It expands the second item. Great. Select the child item and add 3 children to it. So it grabs the fourth element down, which is 1, 2, 3, 4. Right? So it has left clicked and returns get is selected. And then it delays long enough so that the next click doesn't register as a double click. And then it clicks add children. This child element here adds 3 more children and clicks the add button. And then it's supposed to expand it. And this failed. Which assertion failed here? That's what I'm confused on. System timeout. Oh, so it was waiting for is selected. That's surprising because the item's clearly selected. Wait, I'm confused. Hang on. It couldn't have been this assertion because it got to this add. If this assertion had failed, it would have thrown. What's the line number? Relist view test 487. 487. That's recorder success. That wasn't it. 475. 475. This one. So this added children. I wonder if we can do this differently. So wait for, right? And then we can do async. I think we fix it like this. In general, it's good to have these awaits. Most UI testing libraries have implicit wait type situations in here. Right, so we're gonna do this. We're gonna go let's see, we wanna do something like return await child element not is selected, get is expanded, right? And I think what we want to do is that's clicking the expander. So bool RV gets, so if not RV, I don't think my wait for has an implicit, I think it just retries immediately. And I think we need to slow it down. Yeah. So await task delay half a second. So this way it'll fall back. And my retries have a default retry delay built into them. I think it's 5 seconds. Default, yeah. So it retry. Oh, I'm sorry, 5 times with a timeout of 2 seconds. So this will end up slowing that down significantly. But that's okay. That's kind of what we want. So we'll do a delay, fire that off, and that'll probably make that test more resilient. All right, let's go look at the other one. What is the other one that apparently failed yet again? There is log. It captured logs on the that showed captured images. Auto suggest box. Can choice item from the suggestion. Look here. Do I just have this thing auto capturing? Because this recorder can automatically save screenshots. Yeah, so it's blindly always recording these. We probably don't need this anymore. I think this has somewhat been cleaned up a little bit. Yeah, and this move cursor 2 was kind of a workaround. I think I'm going to leave it because of how problematic this test has been. Okay, so let's do this. Let's see. Make tests more resilient. Because I don't like failing tests. I don't like failing tests that actually spell it right. I saw the red. Whatever. Push. Okay, we'll let that guy run and we'll see what happens. We'll see what that happens. Okay, so hopefully that merges, and then we'll have a lovely way of doing list pattern matching in Net Framework 4.6.2. So hopefully, if you are on Net Framework 4.6.2, please consider upgrading. You only have 3 years until you're completely out of support. And I will be very happy when we finally get past Net Framework support. Well, like I said, unfortunately or fortunately, the material design library, my intention is to support a framework as long as Microsoft does. Mostly because I don't have metrics to know how many people it would affect if I killed it. Like that's one thing that I really wish like people could at least like maybe opt in for NuGet metrics of like, hey, report when I pull down a NuGet package, like report what framework I pulled it down for. Maybe multiple, right? Some people download it into a project that's targeting multiple frameworks. So maybe one person reports, hey, I'm targeting, Net 4.6.2 and Net 8. Weird, but sure, maybe you're doing that. It'd be really cool to have those metrics. But unfortunately, all I have is download number, which doesn't give me a whole lot there. So, but curious now. Not bad. 11,000 downloads in the last 24 days. So make for The Sims 4. Oh, cool. Is that you say a free app? You got a link you want to drop to that? Because I do keep and it's running Net Framework 4.8. Yeah, cool. Drop a link. And if you're cool with it, I'll add it to the kind of the wiki page because I keep a running list of people who have built things with it because it's kind of cool to show off. And sometimes people are like, "Oh, who's actually using this?" So maybe I should ask the question: is this link safe to open before I click on it? Yeah, this is cool. Too noob to be a hack. Cool. Let's see. Our screen. Look at that. There are screenshots. Hey, that looks really nice. I like it. Have you updated it to the 5.0 version of Material Design or not yet? Yeah, this is a very nice layout. I'm trying to look and see. I think this isn't. I think this is the 5.0 release. To look to see if there's any of the telltale signs. The cards are what I'm mostly looking at to see. Not yet. Still running for it because I had some problems. Okay, cool. Well, if you run into if you do update to 5.0, let me know if there is feedback on problems. I will mention, in case you haven't seen it. I here. There is a migration guide because there are breaking changes. So in case you haven't seen it, just just be aware of this guy. Um, there are some handy PowerShell scripts for updating the brushes or the styles. That'll probably get you a good chunk of the way there. That a kind user contributed. So just be aware of that. The combo box is lines one. Interesting. Did you have the problem on 4.9 or 5.0? Because there was some combo box issues, but I thought all of those were resolved with 5.0. Because with present, when I go for 4.9, okay, that doesn't completely surprise me. There was some rework that was done on um, 5.0 to fix up a lot of those combo boxes. We at one point in time, I think 4.8 is still using it. We have this weird thing where like the pop up for the combo box goes around the box itself, and trying to position that was a major pain. And then Material Design even stopped rendering their drop downs that way anyway, so we just scrapped all that. And so it's much more idiomatic WPF, and the thing lines up. So yeah, let me know if there's problems because combo box used to be a major pain point on our controls, and so that one I think has finally been put to bed with the latest stuff. Uh, Kind of the cursor not showing the line. Yeah, the blinking vertical line bit on it. That there was a bunch of bugs around that, and it was specifically related to the text box template inside of the combo box. When you have is editable true, which I'm guessing you must have if you saw the blinky cursor, and basically the padding and stuff was getting offset and rounding errors. So it may have even been inconsistent with you depending on how you positioned your combo boxes. But there was an off by one or off by 1.5, I don't remember which, error where basically the padding would overlap it and the blinky cursor would end up off. And it was, so I will admit that. But I now the now the template isn't doing wacky measurement stuff, so should be fixed. If it's not, please let us know. Um, 5.1 may come with hopefully not a breaking change, but this PR here for the text box style refactor is another area where we're trying to deal with because right now the floating hint stuff in text boxes, there's a lot of magic numbers measuring stuff that's going on, and it works great most of the time. But those magic numbers, like there's lots of things people can do that subtly will break it, like they throw in a different font that has a slightly different size, or they tweak this or that, and things just don't work right at that point. Like the defaults, everything works great, but there's just a few of those things, and so figuring out how to do this measurement, yeah. But the last I added the family tree when using GraphX. Oh, cool. Sweet. Yeah. No, thank you for sharing. Um, yeah, and it could be the font that was messing up the combo box. Like I said, now the combo box shouldn't be doing any funky measuring stuff. So that much should be fixed. And like I said, if it's not, feel free to uh, is not all up to date. Okay, cool. Yeah. If you do run into problems, like I said, if I'm guessing this isn't open source. I only see the thing here, but feel free to post feedback on it. Um, Out of curiosity, what are you using to deploy your app? I see it's downloading an MSI. Got it. Um, okay. More shameless self promotion incoming. Uh, as it's free, I'm only using free stuff. Don't worry, what I'm about to show you is also free. So, show you this wonderful other project that has been consuming copious amounts of my free time. So this is a what I'll say is a competitor to like the Squirrel installer or Click Once. Um, but like for example, a little demo here, right? So the idea here and the .NET published stuff isn't something. Oh, Wix. Ooh, you wrote a Wix installer. I'm sorry. That takes work and thinking. Um, the idea here is getting down to an installer that is as simple as adding a NuGet package and then running um, .NET Publish. Like that's how hard it should be to produce an installer. So this is all free open source. This main library here. Um, we're looking to build a hosting solution, a SaaS, for people who don't want to deal with hosting it. But you clearly already have somewhere where you're putting up your MSI. So if you were wanting to, depending on where that hosting location is, this would also give you like auto update functionality inside of your app as well, to be able to do it. So specifically, right? So there's a WPF sample app. I believe it's inside a program. Yeah. Uh, saying everything. um, the idea here is you add the NuGet package. So this is the sample app here, and then you do have to do something like this at the beginning, right? To be able because we need something to effectively bootstrap our SDK to make it go so that you can have all of the needed stuff. Um, and you can see this, it just has a little logger thing built into it. But a line like this, and you're off to the races. Right? You can see the the demo app here is something really simple. It's literally just a bunch of buttons um, that walk you through doing an update, and the code behind each of the buttons basically just shows you, you know, how to check for updates inside your app. Right? You get yourself an update manager, which is not a hard class to instantiate. Sorry, update manager. You just update it. Yeah, and you'll end up pointing it at the update URL. So wherever you're hosting your files, that's what this URL becomes. So if you're putting it, um, yeah. So you do need somewhere to host it. There is built-in hosting stuff for, let's see, distributing. Um, there, I don't, do we not document them here? There's built-in hosting stuff for HTTP, GitHub Actions, S3 buckets. I feel like there's a fourth one that I'm forgetting about. Um, but the easiest thing is if you've already got a server or somewhere where you're hosting the files, just point this update URL to that location. When you run the commands to create the installer, what it'll create for you is an executable. Actually, hang on, I could talk about it, or I could just because that might just be. Now, at some point, I'm going to do a whole stream. This is, like I said, this has been consuming my life recently and every bit of free time. Um, I don't know if you can make Dropbox work. You might be able to make it work as long as, yeah. And yes, Izzy, you can do an update manager pointing to a USB stick. As long as the hard part will be the drive letter. Because, and to be fair, you're in control of the code that feeds that update URL. So if you wanted to iterate over like all removable drives and feed that in to do an update check, it'll work. Let's see, samples, WPF sample. Yeah, because this is what the output directory looks like after you run it for the very first time, right? So this is the sample app. And the key thing here, this you don't need. This is only for people who are updating from like Squirrel or similar, is we wanted to give a nice upgrade path for back compat. If you're brand new, just delete it. You don't need it. What you do need is this manifest file. If we take a look at it, it's nothing fancy. It literally just calls out your versions, and then there's some hashing stuff and metadata that goes along with it, just to keep track of it. When you would push this up to your to wherever you're storing it, you just push all 4 of these files. And the next time you create an installer, you'll see a 1.0.1 or whatever version it is with a NuGet package. You'll get a new setup exe. You'll get a new portable zip, which this you only need if you want to do like an Xcopy deploy. If you don't want to do that, you only need these. The setup exe is a full-blown installer that, well, here, let's just run it. All right, so it's flagging me because I was clearly testing. I had version 107 installed. We'll say go ahead and downgrade it. Poof. We are in and off to the races. I don't know what source this is pointed at for updating. Oh, this is pointed at a web server that doesn't exist, so it's going to time out because it's pointed at an API that I deleted last night. So that's probably not going to work. But this base URL could be anything, right? But it's at the end of the day, it's just looking for that releases.windows.json file. And so the SDK is going to pull that JSON file and go, hey, do I have an update? And then you can choose what to do with that, right? You can prompt the user. You can display the update information. You can do whatever you want. Because at the end of the day, you get this update info, and then you're in control of when do you want to apply the updates, right? When do you want to download the updates? Invoke when needed. Right, so if you're hosting somewhere, you can technically get it to work with GitHub releases as well, but I realize your thing's not open source, so that's probably less of a good option. But you could always spin something like an Azure storage account, which the free tier for Azure storage is usually more than enough for most people, and then push it up there. But yeah, or something like a Dropbox would work as well. So, but yeah, if you are interested, the SDK and the tooling for all of this is free and open source. What we are hopefully releasing in the not too distant future is our own hosting solution. So if you want somebody to host it for you and deal with the signing and all of that stuff, that we're going to charge for. But the actual tooling and SDK stuff, if you want to do the hosting, doesn't bother me at all. But it gives you a really nice basic installer, and it works cross-platform. So if you ever migrate off of WPF, I saw you had a Mac version as well. We have a Mac installer. We can generate a Linux installer. We can do a Windows installer. So it's one of the few solutions I know of that's a good cross-platform installer builder. Yes. Yeah, no problem. It's one of those. Every time I see somebody building an installer, like I've built a handful of Wix installers in the past, and they are difficult. Cross-plat. It works for my Samsung TV. Let me rephrase. It works on Windows, OS X, and most flavors of Linux. Like we've tested like Ubuntu and a couple of the popular ones. I won't say it works on Samsung TV. Maybe I don't know what those run. I think those are a version of Tyson in a lot of cases. Maybe I don't know what that is under the. Just remember that's the installer running. That doesn't mean that the app install that like you can install a WPF app onto a Mac. Just doesn't mean it's going to work. Don't have a Mac version because we don't have the stuff to test it. Yeah, no, that makes sense. That's honestly the Mac development is a pain in the neck for that exact reason. All of the licensing stuff around Mac development can be a bit of a pain in the. Oh, PR merged. Yay, making the test more resilient made it better. Cool. Okay, so tonight's nightly release will now have list pattern matching support inside of the material design library. Uh, let's see. Ooh, can it do installer for Linux of a CMake built file? Possibly. Like, ultimately, the Velopack is just a wrapper around a build artifact. And I say build artifact as though it's one thing, but you pointed at where your build artifacts are. So you build it however you want or whatever is necessary. So if CMake compiles the assembly, because there's a handful of back to GitHub. There's a handful of samples. There's the two here, but that's not the full sample. There is a where is it? I'm looking dumb. Does this have the other samples? Yeah. So the Fusion one again, open source one. This one also has support like demo apps for C++, JavaScript, Rust, um, everything local SQLite database. Oh, cool. Are you doing SQLite directly, or are you going through something like EF Core to do it? But to answer your question, Izzy, like I realize the CMake thing might have been a little tongue in cheek, but we do have sample directions and a sample app with C++. Now, C++ is kind of ugly in my opinion, but or this guy wins sample. Yeah, don't look at the other one. That's generated in big and ugly. But you can actually see the win main, and then where is the init create window win proc. Yeah, so this is a very similar app where there's the buttons for check for updates, download button, restart button, all of that kind of stuff. And it's very much low level C++, like what you would expect. But our intent is to have quite a broad bit of language support inside the SDK, that because we don't want it to be limited. Like the cool .NET Publish stuff that I added into the library, like that leverages an MS Build task and all this stuff, which is really great if you're a .NET dev. But we want to make that experience nice for more than just .NET dev, because despite what I may think, people actually build things in other languages. Um, just using a NuGet for handling the SQL encode. Got it. Yeah. No, there's a handful of those out there that basically just wrap like the SQLite.net or similar that just do straight SQL stuff, which is totally fine. Like for a lot of projects, that's all you need. Something like EF can be a bit overkill if all you're doing is writing to a SQLite database. Um, yeah. Though I will say, if you're building an embedded application, you probably aren't looking for an an installer for it. Usually embedded guys, they've got their own deployment strategies out there. So, but yeah, if people are interested, bookmark it, check it out. There's a Discord server that you can drop questions in. Kaylin, who is my partner, is fairly active in there. I should probably be more active in there, but I was like, I don't need one more thing pulling my hours in a day. At least at present. So, and yeah, if you like it, you can feel free to throw Kalen some love for it, because he is the one who spent a great deal of time building out the SDK itself, because it started as a fork of the Squirrel installer, and I think at this point almost every bit of the original Squirrel code has probably been reworked. So there's very little overlap at this point because so much of it's been rebuilt, the underpinnings of how it works, and it's significantly faster, a lot faster, and smaller. Faster execution, smaller overall size. Mwah, love it. Okay, cool. Okay, I think it is 11:40 for me, and some of us have to work in the morning. So, Izzy, hopefully you don't have too much of a day going for you, but good luck. Hopefully that was interesting for people. I will figure out where to go next. I was contemplating jumping into and doing a little bit of Avalonia potentially next time. I also may end up doing some system command line stuff. I should probably mention. Probably mention. 7:44 in the morning. Oh wow. So I'm gonna want to show one thing. There is this for anybody who's been following the system command line project that I've streamed a handful of times. This is worth a bit of a read today. Anything that uses the word Powder House as its code name is going to be epic. But yeah, so this effectively the system command line is getting one more major refactor, but there's a lot of good that's coming from this, right? There's a bigger investment from Microsoft. People have been asking, hey, is this project dead? We haven't seen much movement on it, yada, yada, yada. Things have stagnated. And some of that was like internal politicsy stuff going on. But there is a high investment from Microsoft. Like I've been telling most people, like the .NET SDK is built on top of System Command Line. So you can only like it's stable enough that the SDK that powers all .NET developers is running on. So may jump into here. The only part here is this is sometimes highly complicated stuff, but complicated ain't that bad. So the blink I have. Oh yeah, cool. Izzy, definitely feel free to either like open an issue or you can drop something in Discord as well.